Hello everyone, welcome to the first expert forum for the producers and users of disaster-related statistics. My name's Greg Scott, I'm a geographer and I'm in the UN-GGIM Secretariat here in New York in the United Nations Statistics Division. This presentation today will give you an overview of the related activities to disaster statistics of UN-GGIM, and this is for session 3, the geospatial dimension, which will be convened on the 10th of June 2021. Now, I guess the first thing you're asking for those that aren't so familiar is, what is UN-GGIM? This is the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management. It's a subsidiary body of ECOSOC in a similar fashion to the United Nations Statistics Commission. So it is an intergovernmental committee with participants primarily from capitals around the world. UN-GGIM was created in 2011 to really enhance and coordinate global geospatial information management around the world, to make decisions and set directions on the use of this geospatial information within national through to global policy frameworks. And importantly, to ensure that countries are able to have accurate, reliable, and authoritative geospatial information readily available to support national, regional, and global development. I won't go into this in too much detail, but there's just a quick overview of the Bureau of UN-GGIM and our regional committees. A bit different to the Statistical Commission is that we have regional committees that have been established for Africa, the Americas, Arab states, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And because of the cross-cutting nature of geospatial information, the Committee of Experts has also established a number of international networks, including an academic network, a private sector network, the geospatial societies around the world, and also an internal United Nations geospatial network. And we also work very closely with the international standards development organizations. For those that may not be so familiar, one of your first questions may be, what is geospatial information? And I've provided a few examples just here on the slide. In essence, geospatial information is data that is referenced to a location or a place, such as, for example, geographic coordinates, which you may have on a map or on a database, or an address. So geospatial information describes where all things are and provides this digital connection between a place, its people, and their activities. And that's really important. It creates that relationship. For those that may have heard of the terms of GIS, or Geospatial Information System, a key component of that is that a GIS has topology, it has structure. So for example, a building will know what parcel of land it is contained within. A road that runs over a river will know that it has a bridge and it goes over the river, not through the river, for example. Really simple things like that. The other thing about geospatial information with modern technologies that we have now and the acquisition capabilities is that this data can be gathered, manipulated, and displayed quite quickly, often in real time. And this is also part of the digital transformation we're seeing in our modern world. To summarize, it reflects the digital version of our physical world in which we all operate. Importantly, it's a critical component of the national infrastructure for a country. It informs us on what happens where and how we integrate a wide variety of data across multiple sectors. And you can see in the center diagram there as an example, all the different layers of data or thematic layers in the context of a national spatial data infrastructure. So that's a bit of background on what is geospatial information. I don't need to explain to you the UN Global Development Frameworks, the way that they're organized and how they've evolved over the period of 2014 to 2017. And the fact that the 2030 Agenda is the overarching development framework that countries aspire to. And within that context, for example, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Paris Agreement, that Urban Agenda, Samoa Pathway, all are contributing frameworks into this overarching global framework of the 2030 Agenda and its 17 SDGs. In a similar way, this is an approach that UN-GGIM has also taken. Over a decade now, and working from the bottom up, it's developed a number of frameworks, methodologies, tools, and capabilities and standards. And as they've progressed over the years, they've developed into more substantive frameworks, such as the Strategic Framework on Geospatial Information and Services for Disasters, the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, and the Framework for Effective Land Administration. And this has been tied together now with an overarching integrated framework called the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, or the IGIF. In the context of this expert forum, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fundamental geospatial data themes, the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, which I'm sure many of you may have already heard of or are even using, the Strategic Framework on Geospatial Information and Services for Disasters, and also the IGIF itself. So I will focus on these four elements quite briefly in a number of slides in this presentation today. So first of all, to the global fundamental geospatial data themes. These are 14 themes that have been developed and mandated by UN-GGIM over a number of years and have now been in existence for some 4 years. As you can see, and you look through those fundamental data themes, they provide our frame for data. And you can see too that much of that data has a significant contributing role to statistics. When we think about addresses, functional areas, buildings, land parcels, transport networks, land cover, and physical infrastructure. All of this information makes up the choreography of our world that exists in a digital world, but it also has a strong relationship to the work of many, many sectors of industry and government, but also obviously has a primary role for supporting the work of national statistical officers and other institutions to produce standardized fundamental data within and across countries. So you will also see as I go through the presentation, I've left links to these documents and further information on each of these different capabilities of UN-GGIM. And I might just mention here a story map that's been developed that works you through each of these fundamental data themes in the link there on our website. I want to just now copy some work from a colleague that many of us will know, Martin Brady from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, who was actually also for a long period of time the co-chair of the expert group on integration of statistical and geospatial information and was a major influence on the GSGF. And this was really one of the starting diagrams that was used when we were thinking this through a number of years ago. And it really refers to the role of NSOs as they publish statistics across these three areas of people, business, and physical environment, or the location domains. And there are four key components to data and statistics that enable them to become information and insights: the who, the what, when, and the where. When we say who, we think about statistical units, people, and businesses that we collect data from. When we think about the what, observations, answers to questions in surveys or columns in administrative data sets. The when is the reference period for a collection or a data item, such as a census, such as a survey, etc. They all have a timestamp. And the where tells us what part of the world this observation relates to. By knowing this, we can create geospatially enabled data and information. And one of the many benefits of this is that it allows us to integrate data from many sources using location, using these coordinates, using these addresses as a common factor. And if we're able to do that of this geospatially enabling data, it enables us to get a much better understanding of the knowledge that we can extract out of the global statistical geospatial framework. So with that, I want to just move briefly on to the GSGF itself. This framework now being adopted by both the Statistical Commission and UN-GGIM in 2019 is an overarching framework that provides what we could term as a process from inputs to outputs, where it relies on geospatial and statistical data, fundamental geospatial data, other geospatial data, statistical surveys and censuses and other big data and different records that then go through a process of building up through principles, 5 key principles, a structure on how we can deliver integrated and harmonized output. Key elements to this are institutional arrangements such as collaboration, technical infrastructure, understanding the national policy and laws of a country, and also standards and good practices that go with that. But a major component is building this pyramid, as we call it, of principles from 1 at the bottom to 5 at the top. The use of fundamental geospatial infrastructure and geocoding, geocoded unit record data. So this is really where we bring the statistical and geospatial domain together into the third pillar, which is the common geographies. So that when we get to the top end of the pyramid, we are looking at not only statistical and geospatial interoperability, but statistical and geospatial integration, so that data is accessible and usable. And the GSGF has now been implemented around the country, but has also been explained a lot more in implementation mechanisms by the expert group on the integration of statistical and geospatial information right at this time. The next and a key framework I want to mention, and so relevant to this particular expert forum, is the Strategic Framework on Geospatial Information and Services for Disasters. This particular framework has not only been adopted by UN-GGIM several years ago, but has also since been endorsed by the Economic and Social Council itself. And this was really driven by a number of developing countries and leaders from within our GGIM community, Jamaica being one of these strong leaders. This particular framework is really quite strategic in nature, and it's really been an outcome of trying to understand disaster situations and the reality that the data sharing mechanisms to support the decision making is generally just not in place. And as a result of this, the many actors and responders and stakeholders that are often simultaneously engaged in response are not only gathering volumes of often concurrent and inconsistent data, but they're also not sharing it. There's no coordination, there's no communication, there's no coherence. And this actually has really underscored the strong relevance of this strategic framework, which is really quite visionary in the way it articulates its scope and purpose and goals. But the key areas are the 5 priorities for action. These priorities for action are governance and policies, which is really about looking at the framing and implementing monitoring decisions across all phases of disaster risk management. The awareness raising and building capacity, really being able to understand and appreciate geospatial data and information and how technical and human capacities are able to be strengthened in all phases of DRM. Data management in the center is one of the most critical, how we collect, how we manage, how we disseminate information that's going to be critically important, both in preparation, but also in response, and how we have the arrangements in place for these, including the data, the standards, the guidelines for its use, confidentiality, all these sorts of things. And then how that is then deployed through common infrastructure and services, the availability of a common operating picture, the availability of interoperability of systems and processes are key components. And finally, and often left last, but the most important is the people, the human resources, and what goes with that, because it's not just technology and data, it's people, it's the cost, it's the arrangements, the administrative support for improving and maintaining all of this information. And so the strategic framework looks at all of these sorts of aspects. And so a key element of the expert forum is a contribution from the working group that has developed this over the number of years, from the working group on disasters and geospatial information for disasters. So you'll hear a little bit more about that in the actual forum itself. Finally, I just wanted to touch on our overarching framework, the IGIF. This is actually a three-part framework itself. It talks about why geospatial information is a critical element of national development and why it needs to be strengthened. It looks at implementation guidance on what actions can be taken and also how. So we have a strategy, we have implementation guidance, and we have action plans. And these are the three components of the IGIF, and you can see a lot of this information on our website. The overarching strategic framework was adopted by UN-GGIM in 2018. The implementation guide was adopted by GGIM with some refinements, which we're still working on, in 2020 in a virtual meeting. And country level action plans, these are how these are going to be carried out, are being implemented in countries as we speak across a number of domains. Key point I want to mention here is that the development of the IGIF has been a partnership between the World Bank and UN-GGIM, and this has been incredibly valuable when we think of the contribution that the bank can provide in country with development and capacity building. I just want to go briefly through some of the overarching strategy of the IGIF, and you may see similarities there to some of the previous frameworks that we've also mentioned. Again, it starts with a very high visionary approach to the problem at hand, the vision being the efficient use of geospatial information by all countries to effectively measure, monitor, and achieve, in essence, sustainable development and to leave no one behind. The mission is to promote and support innovation and provide leadership, champions, coordination, and standards so that we're able to deliver this integrated geospatial information, and that it is able to support not only the SDGs, but national development. Key strategic drivers can be from local to global, and that's really important when we think about how we implement frameworks in countries. They have to be aligned to the national development agendas of a country. They have to be aligned to the national strategic priorities of a country, including their transformation programs. So this is incredibly important. The 7 principles are really the key characteristics and values that provide the compass for implementing the framework and allow for methods to be tailored to individual country needs. So if we're able to achieve these principles or abide by these principles, we're on a very good path to the implementation of the IGIF. The 8 goals, they really reflect where we want to be aspirationally, the future state where countries have the capacity and the skills to organize, manage, and leverage geospatial information across the different domains within countries. Moving down the strategic diagram even further, the bottom half of this is the 9 strategic pathways. And these strategic pathways really are the key linkage between strategy and implementation. They provide a lot of that overarching guidance in terms of how the IGIF is to be implemented. These 9 strategic pathways are, in essence, divided into 3 different areas of influence: governance for the first 3, technology, and people. And you can see the alignment there as well when we think about the different aspects of those strategic pathways, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in my next slide. But importantly, and not to be left out at the very bottom, are the benefits, the social economic value of geospatial information, the importance to citizens and communities and business sectors, to governments and stakeholders, and those benefits. And this is the value proposition that has to be articulated when we think about developing a framework, implementing frameworks. There have to be societal benefits in doing so. But coming back to the strategic pathways, these really are our anchor, and we've provided these and used a jigsaw puzzle as an example on how the strategic pathways are both connected and interconnected, because each of these strategic pathways can be applied within a country in isolation by themselves. For example, in the technology influence, we could be thinking about data or standards. But if we join each of those up and they become connected, then we have an integrated geospatial information framework across a country. Now, an important element of this really is the people environment, is understanding the importance of partnerships, capacity and education, and how we communicate, how we outreach, and how we engage is incredibly important. The governance and technology, whilst difficult, the people environment is really one of the key influencing aspects of these of the IGIF and these strategic pathways. To go into a little bit of detail, and I won't go too far down into this, each of the strategic pathways has what we know as 4 key elements. And so it then breaks down into 36 key elements in total that then break down into a number of actions, quite a number of actions in the implementation guide. So within the guide itself, we have a number of chapters, in fact, a chapter for each of the strategic pathways, and it goes down into all of these different areas. And a key piece of this is that it captures all the different elements of not only geospatial, but the role it plays in statistics and national statistical offices as well, which is incredibly important. Finally, I just wanted to touch on some new work that's been developed at this point in time by the IAG SDGs Working Group on Geospatial Information. And this is the development of an SDGs Geospatial Roadmap. And this is bringing together the national statistical organizations and the geospatial organizations through the IAG SDGs, which is under the purview of the Statistical Commission, to look at where geospatial has a role in particularly the indicators of the SDGs. The vision there is of this roadmap is to see geospatial and location-based information being recognized and accepted as official data for the SDGs. Often geospatial information has been seen as new sources of data or unofficial data or just other big data, when in fact much of it is not, and it's been in evolution now for some 50 years. So the purpose of the roadmap is to communicate this value and the support to the IGIS DGs, and to see how this recognition can be garnered. But it also importantly outlines how we build the bridge between the statistical and geospatial actors working within the global indicator framework. So I mentioned some of these frameworks previously, and it's how we build upon those frameworks, the GSGF, the IGIF, etc. And it's doing this through 3 phases in the roadmap: prepare and plan, design, develop and test, and then measure, monitor and report. And the roadmap will have the perspectives of both the users and the providers, from within countries and within the custodian agencies, etc. So that works in development at the moment and will be brought to the attention of both the Statistical Commission and UN-GGIM over the next year. This is really part of that development process. If we start at the sort of the top right-hand side, where we have the working group on geospatial information, as I mentioned, it picks up on the global frameworks, standards and norms, and then really starting to look at, okay, how does geospatial information apply at particularly those national levels, disaggregation by geographic location, experiences in measuring and monitoring from countries and SDG indicators, and how we produce those with geospatial information. So it's an evolving circle in terms of building knowledge and building capacity for many of our actors in the SDG domain. So finally, just to recap, a lot of the work that supports disaster management and could support the expert forum and this I guess integration going forward. I've covered a number of these, and hopefully they provide some background for you to think about in terms of the related activities of UN-GGIM, the work that's taking place. All of this is available on our website. We've worked very closely with the statistical community, as you can imagine, and many statistical organizations from around the world are also delegations to the intergovernmental meetings, which are convened each August, normally in New York, sadly virtually at the moment. So if you're ever interested in participating, please do let us know. And thank you for listening, and hopefully we can enjoy the forum when we have that in the coming days. Thank you.